Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, trends, news. If it impacts you as a resident, we talk about it. We bring you 3 short stories, 1 big stories, and wins and losses. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta. How goes it?
It goes very well. You know, you always try to get me to possibly do the introduction, but you have it so wired, and I think people are so used to hearing that, they might not recognize they were on the correct podcast if we tried to change that up. So I think you just keep doing that.
I realized I was like trying to play with it like the last couple times to try something different, and I just went back to the basics.
No, I think it's good. I mean, other people have that recorded, and it's exactly the same every single time. And I like that it's not recorded and exactly the same, but you're really, really good at doing it. So it sounds like it matches the brand, and I think it makes it clear that you're on the correct podcast. One of the things that we do always encourage folks to do is be engaged in the community. And one way to be engaged is by voting. And some people in the last election that we had early in this month didn't know that the election was happening until the election was here. They have another opportunity to vote this very month. On the 28th of this month is the runoff from the primaries that we had previously. And early voting starts on Monday, the day that this podcast drops. So Monday the 20th is the beginning of early voting. So if you don't know where the poll places are for early voting, I checked mine this morning and was surprised to find out that most of the places I normally go to vote are not on the early voting list from what I could tell on the Tarrant County website. But you can go put your address in, and you can find where those early voting locations are. So we would encourage everybody to participate in the runoffs from the primary elections earlier this month.
Yep, and the article will have what's up for the battle. There's 5 races on the ballot, depending if you're a Republican or Democrat, but Kay Granger's seat is up with Craig Goldman and John O'Shea. Republican nominee for Texas House District 97, John McQueenie and Cheryl Bean. The Democratic side, you have the Texas House District 97, that's Diane Simmons and Carlos Walker. And the Republican nomination for Texas House District 91, that's Stephanie Click and David Lowe. And then finally, the Tarrant County Precinct 1 Commissioner to fulfill Commissioner Roy Brooks' position between Kathleen Hicks and Roderick Miles Jr. Awesome. So let's go ahead and dive into short story number 1. We're going to dive straight into what's been going on and seeming to increase in importance, and that is what's going on at our Tarrant County jails. A video recently been out showing a knee on Anthony Jr.'s back for over 90 seconds. The video released Thursday by Tarrant County Sheriff Bill Wayborn. It shows a large detention officer put his weight on Anthony Johnson Jr.'s with his knee on while Anthony Johnson is handcuffed for about 90 seconds. Seconds after the officer knelt on him, Johnson can be heard on the video saying he can't breathe. The officer and the supervisor on duty at the jail were fired this week after Texas Rangers completed the interviews Wednesday in the criminal investigation of Johnson's death. The investigation is ongoing and no charges have been announced. There's other parts to this story, but I just wanted to stop here and kind of, you've seen the video, we've seen kind of the recent evidence that people have been fighting for since we've learned about Anthony's death at the jail. Where kind of you feel we are as a community in this process?
I mean, we saw the family members of Mr. Johnson at the commissioner's court when our sheriff didn't attend the meeting to hear from folks before this video was released. And that was heart-wrenching. And then to see this video, you know, I don't know about sheriff protocol and how these things are carried out in a jail, so I can't speak 100% to protocols and what people are taught to do. But this is a situation where we've talked a lot about this, when somebody is experiencing a mental health crisis, and we have a HOPE team in the Fort Worth Police Department that is supposed to approach folks in a different way when that is the case. And we very clearly know that there is a lot of mental health issues arising in our jail. Yep. Our own sheriff has said that it has resulted in the jail being a place where they are having to deal with and administer mental health responses. And so it's hard for me as, a civilian who does not know the details of all of this, but in watching a video, I don't understand the reaction having to be so immediate to where something like this occurs. And we all witnessed the video where a kneeling on the back of someone resulted in death in the past, and in 2024 to still have that occur is just flabbergasting to me. I don't know how somebody does that.
Yeah, when the first story, I remember now, it took a while for this story to develop. I mean, it was 23 days since like the custody of Anthony Johnson, when these families had no idea or heard anything from the Texas Rangers on the investigation of Anthony's death. And so I remember when it first came out, it was about pepper spray. Me and you were talking about, how does someone die from like pepper spray? And it was like all this stuff. Like that was the only thing we got from the story. And to now see what it's become and where it's at now, the amount of people that was there that just saw this, we have to understand that what happened. A man died in jail because a big man had his knee on his back, and they got up, and Anthony wasn't moving. Like, this was what was going on in our Texas jail system, and that is just completely irresponsible. And so Wayburn, yes, he had a press conference and he fired the two people. He mentioned that once you're handcuffed, you're not supposed to apply pressure when the inmate's handcuffed, and that's why they let him go, because he continued to have his knee. But I think now you're seeing, which kind of goes on to the next story here, is the call for his job, for his resignation. And so one of the other stories we wanted to dive in here is Tarrant County Commissioner supports calls for sheriff's resignation following the jail death. Elisa Simmons expressed her support for a call for the resignation while speaking at a press conference held Friday morning. Quote, "It's clear that we need more caring and responsible leadership in the sheriff's office. I don't know we have that now." The press conference was held in response to the release of the video footage. Another individual, which I thought was pretty powerful, Reverend Michael Bell, spoke, who's a pastor at the Greater St. Stephen's First Church. They were able to say a word, able to stop it, but choosing instead to stay silent in the face of this killing. They did nothing to save his life. This is the culture at work in the Tarrant County Jail, the culture of depraved indifference, and it starts at the top with Sheriff Wayburn. Elisa Simmons called the video heart-wrenching. I know we talk about how there's really no way to fire the sheriff, right? There's no way to...
There's nobody who's his boss at the county that can fire him. He's elected. And, we talked about them not even being able to require him to come and speak at the county commissioner's court. And we talked about how he has declined to comment on things. And I think there's one thing to say that you need to wait until an investigation is complete, but to just be a no-show and to refuse to respond to stuff and say nothing, I think is a dereliction of duty. Mm-hmm. I think that that's something we need to take into consideration. Commissioner Simmons's comment about him not caring, I don't know if that's the reason. I just think that when you're in that role, you're responsible for saying something. Yeah.
And I just think about another kind of, this is a story that the silence, that's the kicker, is one, they cut the video right at the announcing him dead. And sheriff says that we stopped the video there because our policy says we don't show videos of people who are dead. And so what was crazy about that is there's people arguing that, no, you're not giving the whole video. We want to see the whole the whole thing, but we're not giving it to us because either one, you're trying to protect your image and, you as a person who's running for election. And so the politics in the footage is also important, because now you also got these young police officers or jailers who are now their own lawyers are asking for the full video. So now there's also not only was he silent, missing the meeting when we had all those people there to talk and advocate for better accountability at the jail, but then he also missed a closed meeting with the commissioners themselves, where Commissioner Simmons is slamming, at the podium saying, where is this guy? Where is God? We need information. And he didn't even show up for the private meeting. And then to now give the video not complete. And now the jailer's lawyers are asking for the full video and is on the same side as Elisa Simmons. And the people are asking for more clarity. It's just a very challenging time. And I just don't know what more has to go wrong where Wayborn or really considers like, you know, a better direction for the county.
I think anytime you cut a video, and if I don't know, I think they said something about there was a policy of what they do show and don't show, but I don't know that he was able to directly point to that policy. And I think there's ways of, you know, blurring parts of the video so that you're not showing things, but I don't know. It's just.
There's another beautiful story on this situation in the Star-Telegram. It's titled "Silence from Tarrant Sheriff: Texas Rangers Nearing a Month After Anthony Johnson's Death." So this is a little older. I mean, it's older than the other stories we shared, but it just talks about on Sunday, Jacqueline Johnson spent her first Mother's Day without her son in 3 decades. The family's attorney, Darrell Washington, told the Star-Telegram this year's holiday was exceptionally painful. He, quote, says, "You don't know whether to tell a grieving mother Happy Mother's Day or I'm praying for you. What is happy about this Mother's Day for her? They're hurting because they don't have the opportunity to grieve. They're having to fight, and with Mother's Day, that was extra tough." And so Johnson was arrested April 19th. It took all of this time to get to this video, which clearly shows that it wasn't pepper spray. He wasn't physically being defensive. His family told Star-Telegram they tried to take him to a mental health hospital, but were told he wasn't violent enough to be admitted. So now just the guilt of feeling like it seems like he was having issues with his schizophrenia and that we don't have the mental health resources or services to then come to see that this is what ends up happening. So the family said they heard from Johnson when he called them from the jail on April 20th. On the morning of April 21st, 2 county sheriff office deputies and chaplain knocked on the door and told them that he was dead. So it's just like the lack of services or resources for families who are trying to do something.
And who do you call?
Yeah.
Because I've literally in the last couple of months been in situations where people who have been clearly experiencing some kind of mental health situation have approached places where I have physically been, and I am hesitant to call the police. And I know that is who I am supposed to call because we have a division of our police department that is specifically trained for that. But they don't have a separate number. You call 911 and you can clearly say that that's what you're looking for, but depending on call volumes and all of that, I think you are not guaranteed that that's who you're going to get. And again, I think it goes to those are not experts in the field that should be addressing this situation.
So, wrapping up the story, I think it just realized that a lot has come post-video, post-advocating for the resignation of Sheriff Wayborn and also the full video so that, one, the jailers also have the chance to showcase their situation and not be the ones we pin the blame on, as I think what they're fighting for. But there's just to me the opportunity to act, to call the sheriff's office, ask for accountability. I'm also going to put links to organizations that are trying to make this a bigger story so that we are keeping Sheriff Wayborn accountable. So please, like, if you're going to act, if you're not worked up about this, if you don't feel like there should be more accountability here, I don't know what else to tell you, but we need to make sure we do more and keep this story going so that the families can get what they need and any type of accountability possible is available. So we're going to go ahead and now move into short story number 2.
So another area that has had a lot of news coverage in the last week has been schools in Fort Worth. And EJ came up with a really great way of describing all of the school articles that we have. The first one starting with budget. So EJ, share with us what it was that you titled this section.
So basically we have, like I said, over 20 plus articles. And so we kind of did this as like the 3 B's to education. And I'm not talking about Paxson, Abbott, or O'Hare. I'm actually
or A, B, C, D, F either.
or grades as well. So budget's one. So we're going to talk about the balanced budget at Fort Worth ISD. We're going to also talk about bigger schools, and then we're going to talk about books and them coming back. Which ones are coming back from the ban and which ones are still not.
Right. So the 3 B's:
So
balance or budget.
Yep.
Bigger as to size of schools is one of the suggestions that they're looking at, and books, because there's been some articles about books. So the first article was the ISD proposed first balanced general fund budget in 7 years. My take from all of this is that they just also announced a lot of cuts, and this is Fort Worth ISD specifically, where they let a lot of people go in order to get that balanced budget. So a balanced budget is a goal for the district over the past 2 years, and the CFO emphasized that process of balancing the books would take just as long, but that they have developed this budget for the first time, and the trustees are scheduled to consider and adopt the next budget on June 11th. They slashed about $37.5 million in expenditures between the last budget and this budget, and they reduced the number of staff, mirroring the district's enrollment declines, and the district enrollments have lost about 948 students, it looks like. So they, in February, voted to cut 112 employees whose positions were funded through federal pandemic relief. So they lost some dollars that they were getting through pandemic relief. They also looked at vacancies and cut unnecessary jobs. And then they're starting to look at closures. I think they've already done some closures, but they're also starting to look at some other closures. Did you have anything to add about the balanced budget part before we talk about the bigger? Because that kind of led to the bigger article as well.
One, I think like we can't, as much as balancing the budget is not a fun conversation, it's hard to make sustaining our efforts a negative thing. And so I think this is healthy for Fort Worth ISD. And so I guess that's my take there. And now, but leading to the larger topic here, this has led Democrats asking Abbott for more funding as school districts across the state face several financial challenges. So Texas public schools are facing budget shortfalls and need a boost in state funding. This is a Dallas Morning News article. Houston Democrat Rep. John Rosenthal, along with about 36 members of the House, wrote that districts have several financial challenges that stem from inflation and chronic underfunding. These issues arise from state failure to improve school funding since 2019. Abbott hit back at the Democrats in a letter of his own, and it was basically just talking about, if you want to solve these problems, support my school choice plan. And then by doing so, we create education savings accounts. And by doing so, I will then give you the things you want. And so, which obviously is a true blow in death if they ever allowed school choice and the things that Abbott's wants into this. But I want to bring up a stat in here that came from a recent survey from the Texas Association of School Business Officials, highlighting the difficult decisions districts are making at some, or are choosing to close schools, reduce staff, or cutting programs. For example, Richardson ISD is closing 4 elementary schools. Dallas schools officials have said they are trimming some high school courses and eliminating central office's position. But the survey included responses for more than 300 districts, and they found that more than half anticipate ending fiscal year 2024 in a shortfall.
What's frustrating about this to me is that there is this whole surplus that the state has, and it's basically being held hostage. Abbott has an idea of what he wants, and he wants these vouchers so that people can take money out of public schools and use them in private schools. And he's not going to let any of that surplus that they have available that could make up some of these shortfalls and make these districts not have to make these cost-cutting measures as drastically as they are. But he has in mind what he wants, and so he's not going to allow that unless he gets support on that thing, which I think, like you said, would lead to worse situations for public schools.
Yeah. And more than half of those also in that survey expect institute budget cuts for the next school year. Many anticipate dipping into fund balances. There's a positive that we have to look at the budget and really figure out what does the future of our districts look like. But I don't think that this is fair that we do have surplus to make this experience easier. And be able to do things like raise teacher wages, to be able to keep programs that we've invested in.
And make those decisions based on sound educational outcomes.
Yeah.
So you're not just doing it because you're in a desperate situation and cutting, willy-nilly. If you fund something and then the outcomes don't result in what you think it's going to result in, then you can go make a change. But to just be making these cuts without based on sound outcomes for kids, which is what they continually say that they're trying to do.
Yeah. Speaking of outcomes, I think a lot of the conversation, let's move into that second B, bigger schools. And that is a plan to merge several middle schools into Fort Worth Independent School District would create campuses that are more than twice the size of those many middle schoolers attend today. Fort Worth ISD officials say having fewer, more populous campus would allow them to offer programs that aren't feasible at small and under-enrolled schools. But research suggests that students tend to fare better academically at smaller schools, especially once they reach middle school.
Well, and I think a while back they added the sixth grade centers. So it used to be that 6th, 7th, and 8th grade were all together. And I don't know exactly what year it was, but many years ago they started having these separate 6th grade centers. And now it looks like they're going back to merging not only 6th back into middle school, but actually closing some middle schools and combining existing middle schools together to have these more mega campuses like you just mentioned, which according to the research is not necessarily in the best interest of student outcomes. Teachers that I know said nobody is clamoring to go to a mega campus. That's not what parents are looking for their own children. And that doesn't even touch on the topics of how do these schools fit into an urban neighborhood.
Yeah.
These schools that they're looking at combining and closing are in individual neighborhoods where students can walk and bike to school. You don't have as many parents bringing kids to those schools in their cars. And so the impact of circulation and traffic patterns around those schools, the community that is built around attending those schools, those are all aspects that I think need to be looked at more closely before we just start making these types of cost-cutting measures.
And I think this is where I and you maybe disagree in the education story, or like I would imagine your teacher friends hear me on this pod and be like, oh no, I don't agree with what EJ's saying here. But I think bigger schools needs a campaign of positivity. Like there needs to be a group campaigning why bigger schools are actually better for students. And the same way somehow density won for urban planners. More density, the better for people's lives, right? I think the research isn't there yet because also we're just living in a different world. But I think from a financial perspective, bigger schools are better for kids, right? In the sense of like, look at Allen High School. Look at these big schools. When you're competing with these people who then can fund resources and give dollars, I'm not saying learning outcomes have been proven to be better at bigger schools, but to give your kids the best buildings and the best resources.
Well, I think that is what they're saying is happening, because the presentations that the folks that I know that they've gone to have been to say, do you want a shiny new building that has these additional programs? What parent is going to say no to that?
Yeah.
And so I think that they need to be looking at all of the outcomes before they start selling off property, before they start building these shiny new campuses.
Because I think that's the other part is, even if keeping the smaller schools is the thing we want, there's a massive cost to that the way we fund schools today just don't exist. I'm not against smaller schools and community-based, traditional, beautiful, historic buildings. However, we can't afford to do that. So
we can't afford to do it when the surplus is being held hostage at the state level.
Correct.
And so again,
surplus also doesn't mean sustainability. It means I have money today.
Yeah.
So when we look at sustainability, we see these outside suburban schools doing what they're doing because that's how, we can look at how we fund schools. I'm not saying that that's the case, but we're also just coming into a much more hybrid world where kids are attending school twice as much as they used to, and you have teacher absentees at schools also as high as they are today. And so I just think school's going to become much more hybrid, where butts and seats isn't the end goal, where you might have a big school 5-10 years from now, but kids are going to school 4 days of the week rather than 5, and a teacher gets to skip a Wednesday to work from home. Like, there's just more of that's going to come. That
needs to be looked into and
researched. And so then when that happens, the campuses are going to look bigger, but doesn't mean everyone's going to be there at the same time. That's my, believe the push of why bigger schools. It's because it prepares us for this, AI world where you have AI tutors that are assisting teachers. There's a whole bunch of learning frontier stuff that's coming. And I think that we can't get tied up of wanting to keep it the same because we like it and the data says it, but the data can only research what exists today.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because I know that there's been these more suburban schools that have, those school districts have not had to deal with some of the issues that are happening more in the urban areas.
Yep.
And so they've grown massively. And then a lot of people have moved out there and those schools have gotten really big. And then they go and they ask taxpayers to fund more stuff. And the taxpayers are like, no. Yeah. I mean, I got a ton of text messages from counties that I don't even live in. I'm not sure how I got on these mailing lists, but I got from Hood County and from, the Granbury area asking me to vote against bonds for schools. And so it was like, come on out here, come to our good schools. These schools are growing. And then a lot of people went out there and now they have a need to fund more stuff there. Yeah. And they're refusing to fund some of that stuff. Yeah. So I think you and I do have a bit of a difference about what we think is in the best interest. And I don't know the answer for sure because I haven't done the research for student outcomes. I am someone who attended some very small schools myself. Yeah. And I think that one-on-one stuff is really important. I have a child who very much didn't want to go to traditional school and argued for unschooling. And so this thing you're talking about with, they can learn online and pursue things that they are passionate about. That speaks to me too, but I still have in the back of my mind all my teacher friends that are I need to be in a classroom with students.
But it just goes back to me. It's like the whole school hasn't prepared for the post internet world in the sense of Blockbuster that was by your school died and now we're on Netflix. JCPenney's, Ross, now we're on Shein and Temu, right? It's like we have moved into a world where, yes, physical experiences are going to be anchored to our education system, but it needs to be 80-20 now because families want agility, families want mobility, families take vacations, families work from home, families take their experiences, want to go meet family in the Rio Grande Valley area, want to so it's just school isn't just the building anymore in the classroom. And so saying that we have to build it and we're afraid of having more kids in a building, it's just, I think, the real problem is how we fund schools and the obsession of butts and seats. And if we change that, I think you can make big schools while still having the things that we want, small work, but then the rotation of how we do school and giving kids more choice. And then the question is
who has the privilege and the ability to be flexible like that and who doesn't. Yeah. For some, school is a place for their kids to be while they work and they don't necessarily have the ability.
But sometimes you're working at nighttime and we're school then.
School doesn't help with that and the daycare doesn't help with that.
So what if you had a bigger schools that were open 24/7 and now you had kids who were able to go to school at the nighttime and now you can change. And I think there's that imagination of how do we rethink about situations because schools should no longer close because kids have problems after 3:00. If student support services are only available during the day when kids are in class, they're actually safe when they're not in school. But we make it okay for the kids whose parents work at nighttime. So it's just there's a lot of that I think we just need to explore. And
I think being willing to explore it, absolutely, because a lot of times people take a position and dig their heels in and refuse to talk about it. And I think that you and I are not in that situation, even though we might be coming at this topic in a little bit different way. And I might already lean a certain direction and you might lean another direction, but being willing to talk about it to figure out what is in the best interests of learning and outcomes. And I'm very, serious about community and people being together. And I worry about going to a fully internet thing where we all in front of our screens separated from each other. And so I understand that what you're proposing is not necessarily going the complete opposite direction and being all the scary negative things that I might be conjuring up in my mind. So,
and something really that inspired me. I went to Japan for a month, and little Okinawa Island had one school for all the elementary kids, and it was massive. But when you have, to me, it also makes you more community, because now the school that over there that you never talked to those parents in those neighborhoods, now you're talking to each other. Now you're on a bigger team together with enough funding to support it. So again, but I also think bigger doesn't mean we lose the quality, because I do think we need to have a real conversation on how we fund schools, which is the biggest problem, in my opinion, of all of this. So we still got to move into the third B, and that is books. But I think this one is just kind of an update on where we are.
So there was a Fort Worth Star-Telegram article: as Fort Worth ISD returns most banned books to shelves, questions remain about book access. Officials with Fort Worth Independent School District returned most of the books that were unavailable to students for the majority of the 23-24 school year after being pulled for review of inappropriate content, and parameters surrounding student book access are still somewhat blurry. So I guess there were 118 titles that were pulled from school libraries in August after officials closed libraries to students during the first 2 weeks of school, which I think back then everybody was in an uproar about that. And then it was learned that that's something that happens at the beginning of every school year. Librarians are not asked to come into school early to do all this stuff. So this inventory of books and a review process happens at the beginning of school years. And so kids aren't necessarily going to the library the first couple of weeks of school. But 90 of those titles are now coming back. Fort Worth ISD officials have declined to say whether this process will be finished by the last day of school, which is May 23rd. Additionally, questions asked for specifics of how each book were deemed inappropriate or appropriate for certain age groups have gone unanswered, and officials have backtracked on the reason why the review happened in the first place. So I think that there's a list here of the books. They've gone through this 9-month review process, including searching for, different content of these books, confirmed about 2 weeks ago that books were returning. And I saw some back and forth with some folks saying, who's going to make these decisions, and shouldn't parents be making these decisions? And, I tend to believe that librarians go to school to learn kind of what's age appropriate. I have my own personal story with my librarian growing up, who put books aside for me, knew the genres of books that I was interested in, spent a great deal of time, and I know so many stories of young people who maybe aren't the biggest avid readers on the planet, and having librarians able to find something that's of interest of those kids, so that it kind of opened them up to the idea of reading when maybe they would have refused to read 100%. Yeah. But in all of this, it always came back to, if a parent wanted to have certain things kept from their kids, there is a process by which they can do that. And they can make sure that their kid doesn't see what they don't want them to see without impacting all of the rest of us, and making those materials not be available to those of us who would like to have a more, open policy of what books are available to our kids.
Yeah. And, sometimes the people who are trying to ban books actually don't even read books. So it's,
And many of them haven't read the books that they're trying to get banned.
So I do want to end our education story with just also remembering that 70 years ago, I guess last week, the USC Supreme Court ruled separating children in schools by race was unconstitutional. On paper, that decision was Brown versus Board of Education. However, American schools have been resegregating. The country is more diverse than it ever has been, with students more exposed to classmates from different backgrounds. Still, around 4 out of 10 Black and Hispanic students attend schools where almost every one of their classmates is another student of color. The intense segregation by race is linked to socioeconomic conditions that we see here in Fort Worth. Students of color compose more than 90% of the student body, are 5 times more likely to be located in low-income areas. And so I know we're talking about bigger schools, we're talking about books, we're talking about budgets, but at the same time, we really need to be looking at where our kids go to school compared to the kids we don't see and the families we don't see, and understand that even 70 years after Brown versus Board, we're still dealing with massive segregation in our schools. And so, I just wanted to make sure we ended there. All right, we're going to move into, the third story, and that is, we haven't talked about Fort Worth politics, I feel like, in a long time, because county has been taking a lot of steam. But we have a lot to share with you on just like infrastructure building in Fort Worth, especially as we get ready for the big story, which I know everyone's excited about, Fort Worth being the 12th biggest city in America. So we're going to get that. But we first want to talk about how we're already seeing how Fort Worth is thinking about growth and also the consequences of growth. So short story number 3 is Fort Worth local infrastructure.
So this is also talking a little bit about budget when it comes to the city and where the city is budgeting and where dollars are going. There's a Fort Worth Report article titled "Fort Worth Plans to Move Around Millions of Federal Dollars to Meet, Spend, or Lose Deadlines." So these were dollars that were provided federal COVID-19 relief funds, and they need to be spent by 2026 or risk being sent back to Washington, D.C. Rising construction costs and delays on projects, city staff are proposing reshuffling those dollars to meet these deadlines and follow through on prior commitments. This includes reallocating money from the American Rescue Plan Act and general funds to projects that the staff is confident can be completed within the next 2 years. So you don't only have to designate where they're going to be spent. They actually have to be designated to those projects, and those projects have to be wrapped up within the next 2 years. So this is a two-pronged strategy, according to City Manager David Cook, where the council is going to look at, they talked about this in their May 7th work session, just to make sure that these ARPA dollars go to the capital needs that we currently have. So these dollars have to be allocated in 2024, and we're in the middle of 2024, so this is getting to be a pressing issue of time, and spent by 2026, as I said. About $85 million of these federal and local monies will be moved around, mostly to tackle transportation projects, while city staff continues to find dollars to close a $100 million funding gap for projects further down the road. So I think that the council was speaking about this, and much of the reallocating was possibly looking at moving some of these dollars to transportation, which is mainly roads in this case, in far north Fort Worth. And some of these dollars were going to go towards the Evans and Rosedale project, which now has been delayed because they've changed who they're going to have carry forward that project. And the city is proposing that these two projects be moved over to the general fund balance because the money allocated is not expected to be spent in 2026. So that was both the Evans-Rosedale project and the Texas A&M Innovation Hub. So there's no timetable when the general fund money has to be spent. So it'll be a place where we can do the Evans-Rosedale project the right way and not try to rush, is David Cook's suggestion to staff.
Yeah, and if you look at, I think the big controversy is here, is that these are ARPA dollars that were used to help people during COVID.
So there's two things about that. Yeah. There were ARPA dollars that were designated to going directly to help people during COVID, but it was also to help local governments with projects that were negatively impacted during COVID. So that's why things like the convention center can fall into using this money, and why it can go to transportation projects. So it's not a misappropriation of funds. I know it.
No, but I guess what I'm saying though is, but we're going to fund those dollars in our areas that don't, I would say, are not our communities at the most economic need or needed of issues. If your neighborhood was impacted by COVID, I think the challenges that you see Chris Nettles or Gina Bivens saying in the story is a lot of these projects are in North Fort Worth, outside of the loop, to take American Rescue dollars to fund projects away from where I would say a lot of the communities who were impacted by COVID where it should go. And that's just a personal opinion of this conversation.
Well, and I think you and I have spoken about, rapid growth in a sprawly way and how inefficient that is and how funding that is not paid for by the tax dollars that are collected. And so we have gotten ourselves in a situation where there is rapid single family residential, for the most part, development in far north Fort Worth, where now those folks are clamoring and saying that they want more connectivity and they want their roads addressed. And so there is a demand for sure. And whether or not we are continuing to look at data and equity when we make these decisions is definitely an important thing. And I think the two council members who brought up concerns about moving things from the core of the city and from the east side to the far north are highlighting that concern, that these decisions are being made on what is a shovel-ready project versus equity and data.
To me, it's when we talk about neighborhoods and we say we're voting because we think government spending is too high, but then American Rescue Plan dollars are federal dollars, and now they're going to build roads in the suburbs because of a decision you made to live out there. Now, you would always, there's some people out there who says, oh, homeless people or people who are poor or dealing with challenges are there because of their own decisions. So should we help them? Well, now you're mad that you chose to live in a neighborhood that has one stoplight every 10 feet.
Bar ditches.
Yeah, and you're mad at us, and now you want the dollars. And so it's like, wait, you can't say, oh, poor people are there because of their decisions, and that's consequences. Well, then you got to use the same language for yourself.
It's funny that you say that, because as a city planner, I very much looked at where I chose to live based on those kind of things. And never would I ever have bought a house in a far-flung suburban sprawl neighborhood that had vacant land next to it, regardless of what that land was even zoned, because zoning can change. Yeah. And so, those are decisions, but also they're decisions by what you can afford.
Correct.
Because the places that have those amenities that people are now clamoring for in the far-flung places are more expensive. And so not everybody has the ability to buy a house in the more expensive area where all that stuff is already located.
Or you could do it done like where, what we did, in a sense of there's affordable places, but it doesn't look like.
It's not a big fancy house.
Yeah, and it doesn't look like
and
what TikTok made you think a Texas house looks like.
Yep.
And so,
I looked at some of those houses when we were house shopping, and they were new construction and not near as sound, and I decided that wasn't for me.
And this is where I'm not against the funding, because this is where I want to show is that capitalism psychologically hacks you, and then you're in trouble. Where you saw a big house on Zillow that looked like the house you would want, and then you bought it, and then you realize, holy snaps, there's a lot of consequences being marketed to by the exploitation of some capitalist resale dealers on how they work. That you see this in college debt. When kids go to some fancy art institute that costs $40,000 and then they get a degree that's not economically viable, now they're $120,000 in debt with no job. So this happens to us all the time. So I'm not against supporting, especially because 60% of Fort Worthians live outside the loop. I'm not here to not support. But I also just think that this, what you said so eloquently, data and equity, ARPA dollars specifically, I hope there was some language around the needs, who needs these dollars based off of that. But if there wasn't, then I guess
And then also, if they're going to do the projects that they're now putting aside with general fund dollars, that there should be some requirement that actually happen, because there's definitely situations where projects have been postponed, dollars have been moved around, and then with inflation and different things, then there's a risk of those projects not happening in the future, because these council members may not be there anymore. Somebody else may come in with other ideas about what should happen. And so there's some discussion in here with council members talking about equally distributing these dollars across the city. And, that goes back to, is that really what we should be doing? Because in the past, there have been dollars spent in a squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of manner, which was not equitable. Then we started to try to put this equity piece in there, and we did the neighborhood improvement funding, which people would get mad in my district and say, how come District 9's not getting any, when I was the District 9 council member, how come District 9 isn't getting any of these dollars? And I was like, I can point, we are looking at data and equity here. we are looking at neighborhoods that have been ignored for years and years and years, and those are the ones that are going to get this funding first. And so that can't necessarily always be equally distributing the dollars to every council district, because not every council district rises to that level of needing it if we're measuring things in equity.
Yeah. And Ann just took it to physics. And so there's a lot of you who enjoyed how technical this all could get.
Sorry.
But I'm glad we did, because, guys, you know what's crazy? I actually think this is going to be, if you listen to one episode of the 817 podcast all year, I actually think this is it, because we're already 50 minutes in and we're still on short story number 3.
I know. I think we're going to have to go beyond an hour today.
No,
I do want to mention one other thing.
We have a ton to hit. So no, go ahead.
So in this same article about moving money around, Councilmember Beck did mention the library downtown, and that was something that came up for me this week too, because I went to Arlington for a meeting and was there an hour early, and went to downtown Arlington, which when I was in school at UTA, downtown Arlington, the idea that there was such a thing was questionable. But there literally is a downtown Arlington now.
Poppin'.
It is popping. And they have a downtown library.
Yeah.
And that reminded me of how we really, I mean, I know we have a little pop-up library happening in the old city hall. I appreciate the desire to have something temporary.
Yeah.
But the fact that I hope she keeps bringing it up, because we need to have a central library of prominence. And, you know, I don't know. Arlington has a central library.
Yeah. So let's get to it. All right. So let's go move into the next. So we're still in our short stories. This short story that we're moving into now, it's just like, again, we're talking about these infrastructure deals that are happening. The next one is the Fort Worth removes minority business requirement for the $479 million trash contract. You're more aware of this one than I am, Ann, so go ahead and kind of bring us through it and just like what we need to know.
So this is also a Fort Worth Report article saying that Fort Worth moved to remove the business minority requirement for the $479 million trash contract. There was an earlier article that talked about how this was also touching on North Fort Worth, where many of these missed trash pickups seem to be happening in far North Fort Worth, and some of the council members from up there were saying that that's who they were hearing the most complaints from, which made me wonder if there's something about the development patterns that makes it more difficult for the trash to be managed and picked up in those areas. I think that's something we should look at before we start removing the requirements for minority contractors. This deal with waste management and night waste pickup has been in place for 3 decades is my understanding. And there's some question as to whether you require that minority component when there is not enough minority contractors in existence to make it a competitive process. In the past, that has been the case in a number of industries. So what the city of Fort Worth did in the case of building contractors is they partnered with a large building contractor, Beck, the city of Fort Worth, and they put minority contractors through a education process to get more minority contractors eligible. And so I'm not sure why that wasn't an option here. As I said to you before, I tend to hesitate to have really hot takes on things where I'm sure that there had to be some conversations about this that we're not all privy to. But I know at least a couple of council members were concerned about the precedent that this might set and voted against removing this requirement. I don't know if removing the requirement is going to result in no longer having the minority contractor be a part of this. I would hope that that wouldn't be the case. I would hope that we would find a way for that to be the case. You can see the differences in the trucks in your neighborhood. Night picks up in my neighborhood. You know, it's anecdotal to say that I haven't had my trash missed that often or at all, I think. So I don't think it should be based on anecdotal things like whether or not it's been a problem for me personally. But I do think that if there is a specific area in which this is happening, that there might be other reasons why that is the case.
Yeah, and we had 2 council members vote against this, and that was Chris Nettles and Jared Williams. I am interested why the other minority council members didn't also stand for this. So I'm just interested, maybe their areas had a lot of complaints about trash, and so they were more trying to be like
responsive to their constituents.
So that's just something I'm curious about. But to me, this goes back to the reimagining what does it mean to help minority-owned businesses? Because what you said is at the same time, like, I think like the challenge here for these kind of gigs is like basically it's still this legacy developer or business that's been around for 100 years and knew Bob and John since the beginning of time. And they go and then they get these minorities to play as a shell company and say, hey, we'll make your business the name and all that. We'll ride the contract, but you're our minority face into the program. And I mean, I know friends in the home development space who are that, and they've made a good living for being the minority rep for the big white development org to then get some funding. But I also think like that doesn't, like, to me, it doesn't change the power. At the end of the day, Knight's been around forever. Developers been around forever. And like the problem that we face in America with capitalism is compound interests in not just money, but in relationships hold true. And so like, how do you build trust and actually giving the trust to someone that is, to lead it fulfillingly rather than just making them a shell company for the big thing.
And in this case, I don't think they are. I mean, Waste Management has Knight as their minority contractor, and Knight has had like 25% of the contract for 2 decades. Yeah. So I think one of the council members said that they'd been given a significant amount of time to try to right the problem and didn't do that. But that hasn't been clearly spelled out as to what that looked like. They just say that industry standards say it should not exceed 1,100 missed collections per month, and that they are exceeding that. So I think that, again, we don't know all the ins and outs, but I think that it is a problematic decision to make when that has been a successful minority contract for as many years as it has been.
Yeah, and I love the quote that we're in the position because we haven't fulfilled a promise to residents, which one's weekly reliable pickup of their trash. Mayor Parker said, if there's one thing we've all learned, it's when you mess with people's trash, it's the first thing they're going to complain about. So I think that's a good way to end that. We're going to move into the other story around this space. It's Fort Worth Panther Island gets more federal funding. We've been pretty quiet on Panther Island. We haven't said a lot about it in a long time. But the flood control portion of Fort Worth Panther Island hits another milestone Tuesday after the project received an additional $20 million from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to finish the project's design. The money will go toward designs for the Samuel Avenue Dam, Marine Creek, a pedestrian bridge, and restoration work at both Rockwood and Gateway Park. This brings the total amount of federal government has invested into the project to $443 million over the past 3 years. The Army Corps announcements of additional funding is welcome news, said Fort Worth City Council member Carlos Flores. The money will help the project continue to meet critical schedules. Mayor Maddie Parker said in an email, it is encouraging to see the continued progress to fund critical components as the design and construction process continues. The Army Corps needs about $68 million more dollars, according to project updates from the end of 2023. So a lot to still go through on this. What is kind of your take on the new funding?
I mean, I think it's something that was anticipated. There was some stalls in federal funding during a prior administration. I think this administration has supported it. And I think that now that there's a lot more clarity in the division of who's in charge of what when it comes to the flood control portion of this project versus the economic development portion of this project. There's been entities that have come together to kind of relook at the land use on the island itself. It's a lot to keep up with and dive into and understand, but I think that it seems to be moving in a positive direction. Yeah. To allow an area that was predominantly industrial uses kind of in very close proximity to the core of a downtown to evolve into being something different and address a flood management issue at the same time.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of the story is Congress approved $526 million in 2016, but disagreements with the Trump administration over the project's feasibility held up funding. However, the November 2021 passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act enabled the Army Corps to allocate $403 million toward the project in January 2022. So when we are all walking around Panther Island in 2065, we can say Biden did it. But at the end of the day, this is another example of you can't be anti-government spending and then enjoying all its riches that it gives you, like Panther Island or Northside Development or whatever else we just been talking about. We've been funding for economic development. We have made it. We are an hour in, and we have made it to the big story. Honestly, go ahead and just take a break. Like, you should just pause the episode, take a break. Because you went through a whole episode without even getting to the big story. Since Fort Worth has booming population and becoming a big city, we just wanted to give you a big episode. All right, there's a lot happening. And so we're going to dive into the big story, which is the population growth and Fort Worth jumping to number 12 on the list.
So the first article is a Fort Worth Report article that Fort Worth jumped to number 12 in population and is poised to overtake Austin.
Uh-oh.
I know. We don't want to be like Austin. So our growth has propelled it to become the 12th largest city in the country, according to new census numbers. And we're, like I said, about to overtake Austin within the next year. And some people are saying we could be over 1 million already because these numbers are, not like yesterday. And people have continued to move here. So the newest release of U.S. Census numbers show that the city has the second largest population gain nationwide in 2023, with over 21,000 new residents. Only San Antonio's growth outnumbered Fort Worth with almost 22,000 new residents to the Alamo City. This addition of new people who now call Cowtown home has inched the city closer to the 1 million population mark. Census numbers show that we are behind Austin by about 2,000 residents. So the demographer that they talked to in this article says that the jobs being created in Fort Worth and that there's still a fair amount of land available within the city limits that can be developed as residential is kind of what is lending to the ability of Fort Worth to grow as much as it is. It's really had to do with economic opportunities, but also with the availability of housing and the price of that housing as well. I know everyone talks about the housing being very expensive, and if you compare it to what it was, in the early 90s, it is absolutely very expensive. But in comparison to some other communities, it's less expensive. So that's why I think people are still coming here to avail themselves of a less expensive house.
Yeah.
But they say also that probably another element that kind of drives growth is quality of life and the quality of schools. And while Fort Worth and San Antonio saw large population gains last year, Denton also placed in the top 15 cities with the largest gains. Almost 8,000 people moved to Denton in the last year. And in comparison to large suburban hubs like Dallas and Austin, did not rank on the list of growing cities. The numbers actually show a downturn trend in the population of both those cities. Dallas is actually experiencing a net out domestic migration, so more people are moving out of Dallas than moving into Dallas, and Dallas has been growing largely because of natural birth, changes in its birth minus death rates.
I love this story because Fort Worth is so happy right now. Like the Fort Worth people who write or position our marketing and narrative to the world is just loving. Better than Austin. Dallas is losing people. Fort Worth is great. Look at us. And I think this story does that. But luckily for everyone who listens to this podcast, we do not just read the Fort Worth news. We also read the Dallas Morning News and their interpretation of the growth. So the next story here is how they interpret the growth. And I actually think is going back to having a more honest discussion about our growth. So we're going to talk about population boom in Texas. Suburb sparks housing development, census data shows. This is Dallas Morning News. Harris, Travis, and Collin counties were 3 of the top 5 U.S. counties that led housing gains. And North Texas, Salina was the fastest growing city with a population of 20,000 or more. So when you look at it from a county level, I did not say Tarrant County made the top 5. I didn't say that. And so when you look at the rapid growth, Texas population soared. Housing stock exploded. Significant gains in Collin County and Rockwalls counties. North Texas, Salina topped the fastest growing with an additional other 3 cities from Collin County. Those being Salina, Princeton, Anna, and Prosper. So 3 of the top 4 were Collin. Fort Bend, Texas, full share was the second fastest growing, but Prosper, Princeton, Anna, and Salina were the fastest growing cities in 2023. You also have Forney, which people forget, but that's East Dallas. So I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 around Dallas that were in the top fastest growing cities. All right. That made the top 10. So for me, I think what's interesting is like going back to this whole Dallas Fort Worth versus Dallas Frisco Plano. Dallas Frisco Plano, by numbers based off of these 2 stories, are outgrowing Fort Worth as a whole. Fort Worth is taking the benefits of being a large city size.
Yeah,
so
our area is big, and there's a lot of land available left that hasn't been developed.
Yeah, so our small cities aren't seeing this growth because those small cities are in our city. But I just think like this narrative also needs to be shared, that just because we're growing as a city doesn't mean we're the fastest, strongest growing place in the North Texas Metroplex region.
Well, and I don't think it's the strongest way to grow. That is a concern. So all of those cities that you just named are small cities that I can't say that I'm totally intimately familiar with what they have there, but I know they don't have 3 world-class museums. I know they don't have downtown urban cores. And many of the things, and so a lot of people are looking for that lifestyle. They want to live out in a smaller city, but you have to know that if that continues, you're going to end up like far north Fort Worth with a lot of roads that can't accommodate all those people living in their cars. And there's not going to be public transportation out in those places either.
No, yeah, we are, I mean, we're only at like the Hazlet level, which if you look at a North Texas map, like Hazlet is like, if you just keep going right, is like Richardson, Wiley, Plano. But Dallas and Collin County didn't have Allen, Frisco, Prosper, Salina. Like Salina is more north than Denton. So like we're just doing the same thing. Like we're behind on this like north growth thing. But what I'm saying is like you can see like if you look at the Metroplex, it's kind of like an oval that leans to the right.
To the Dallas side of.
Yeah, and to the top right. That's where the development's happening. So like I just want people to like calm down on like our growth and that we're rocking at it all, because when you zoom out and you hear the narrative from non-Fort Worth people and non-Fort Worth media, there is a lot of growth happening even faster than our nice big-ish city.
Well, and I think that if it's quality of life and all of that, that we have to not just rah cheer that a lot of people are coming here, because that quality of life is going to diminish if we're not keeping up with infrastructure and the other things that are necessary in order to make that growth not just spiral into massive congestion and not having all of the resources that people are going to end up demanding if we just allow massive residential development to continue to occur in a sprawly pattern.
And it kills the urban core. Like look at Dallas. Your comment was just about how no one's moving to Dallas, or not as much people are moving to Dallas, and all of its gains are from births and whatever that kind of comment you were saying. Like, but to me, like you would have to show Fort Worth's data by splitting the loop and outside the loop, and just match it to Dallas and Collin County's demographics. Like, if who cares? This is a part of Fort Worth City. If that is a part of Collin County, like on mirroring Dallas, we need to look at that data that way, because I bet Fort Worth inner core is not growing just like Dallas's inner core is not. Dallas, the city isn't growing, but if you just took Fort Worth's inner core, are we growing? Because when I drive by the skyline on the highways, there's really not that many people compared to when I'm driving by the skylines of Dallas. Those I mean, that's traffic is way different than when I drive by Fort Worth's. And so it's just like our traffic is Buc-ee's and Tanger Outlet. That's our traffic.
Well, and I think, but you can look to those other places that have the booms and the faster growth ahead of us and see where their problems are happening and where we're headed if we don't start doing some things. And one of the other articles we're going to talk about is infrastructure and maintaining our streets and the ramifications of growth. And you can look to Dallas and see that they've already run into this problem. They are looking to put infrastructure into their bonds because they have street maintenance that they can't keep up with. And there's an article coming up, and I don't know if you want to jump to that or if you want to get through all the growth articles before we jump to that.
I think we're going to have 3 stories about ramifications of this growth. But my last kind of take here is that it would be nice to really question, is Fort Worth downtown and Fort Worth loop, in the loop, Are we well off? Everyone's saying Dallas isn't growing, Dallas is losing people, but really, okay, Fort Worth is growing. Do I really feel that as an in the loop resident when the Fort Worth guy for Tad didn't even get close to making it?
Well, I don't know if that is the measure. I think you can look at the facts that are put out by Downtown Fort Worth Inc. And the fact is that more people are living downtown than have it in the past. And you can look at the number of units that are being built in the near south side. Yeah. That's not residential though, that's office.
But that's still a thing, and I think like the $2 billion that we're funding in downtown, that's his pitch. But we're holding on to large institutions to pay the bills. Texas A&M being down there, anchoring the Panther Island and the Army Corps. Like a lot of us is like, it's really holding on to like big institutions to save our downtown rather than like it's naturally, a bunch of democratized, cool entrepreneurs and creatives like saying, man, this place is so cool and I want to invest here. It's just like holding on to like institutional underbellies of Texas to save our downtown.
I think I'm just talking about where people want to live and whether or not there is growth in the residential population in the core of the city versus all of it going to the suburban sprawl. I think that there is population growth in the core of the city. There are more people choosing to live in the urban core. There's more people choosing to live in the urban neighborhoods around the core, which is why it's so important to provide a diverse variety of housing in those places so that not everybody has to go to the sprawl.
But the other big problem of that core, a fourth of that pie, is Haltom City. We don't even count it as the core. It's not even ours. Haltom City is not even ours, and it's in the core, and it's 1/4 of the pie. So
it's so crazy how many cities the boundaries of Fort Worth completely surround.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, like Haslett, like you said, Westlake.
Yeah. So it's just all in all, like, again, I'm not saying I love living in the loop, and I actually love the feeling of it right now, and it's been great. And I think, but again, I get concerned when I see everyone poo-poo in Dallas, but then like I think Fort Worth could be also bleeding in the middle, and we're not acknowledging it because all we see is that top side. But I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it's people coming together being proud from the core of Fort Worth. But I think you and I are lost because we are inside of it as well. Like the average Fort Worthian, I do not relate to because they probably live out of the loop. They drive 30 minutes to work. Like it's a different person than I am. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm getting my house remodeled and the guy working on my house lives up north and he said he loves it. And he said it's great up there. And he said it wasn't a bad drive to get here. I'm like, how long? He's like, oh yeah, 30 minutes. I'm like, oh, cool. You didn't think that was bad? Cool. And he loves where he lives in Fort Worth. So it's an interesting time, but hey, good story. Let's go ahead and hit the ramifications though, which you brought. So
the first ramification is just being able to keep up with the infrastructure. I think we had an article on our last pod that talked about a desire on the county side to get out ahead of some infrastructure before some housing, and that they were, allowing some development to occur in a way that would put roads ahead of the development, which is not typically what happens, which is why you end up with unhappy people living in an area where the infrastructure is not keeping up. There's an article in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram that Fort Worth kills proposed street maintenance fee over concerns about costs to residents. In full disclosure, there was some city staff that reached out to some folks to serve on a task force to look at whether or not this would be a way to address the need to deal with aging infrastructure in our city. And I was asked to serve on that task force and agreed to do so. But in the meantime, I guess they've spoken with council members, and the majority of council members was hearing from constituents and were really not in favor of addressing this in this way. I think that it was a conversation to be had because the problem still exists. There's still aging infrastructure that needs to be taken care of. This fee would have equated to about $109, I think, a year per resident. But I guess the council has decided that this is not the way to address that. And this kind of plays into what I was talking about. Dallas is way behind in aging infrastructure as well. And they are looking to put, some money into their bond to address that. So while they've decided not to handle it this way, it doesn't make the problem go away. They've got to figure out how to do this. And they either have to find it in the budget that already exists, which means taking it away from somebody else, some other department, and I don't know who that's going to be. But if we want to address our aging infrastructure, it's got to be tackled in some form or fashion, and it's going to take money.
Yeah. And this is an example of we are not growing our budget. We're trying to have a fiscal responsible budget. And so as we grow as the future of Texas City and to be a spotlight for the future, we're not actually able to fund in actually building that city because we're more prideful of saying we have this conservative budget. And now we're trying to put fees on people because all of our budget's tied up to CCPD, it's tied up to other things. And so we're asking for additional fees. And this is the consequences of...
And then the poor water department, because it all goes on the water bill. And then everybody wants to blame the water department when half of those fees don't have anything to do with water.
Yeah. And, I don't know, with Michael Crane's in here arguing that this is not the right time to do it. He's trying to be he's using the Republican narrative of like, I'm saving you dollars, not making people spend, but then your roads don't happen. And I don't know, Michael, I know you're a listener of the pod. If you're listening to this, if you got to an hour and 10 minutes, I know you're probably going to run for more stuff. And even though we're cool and all that, I'm going to have to say a lot of stuff about you moving forward in this future. So I'm just letting you know. All right. I know you're going to run, but I also see you at East Side stuff. I also see you hanging out with people. And so if you're going to do the Republican narrative and say, oh, we're not going to give, pit dollars on people, look what I did. But then you're going to show up on our blocks and start doing all that stuff. I just want you to know I see the politician. And so if you're going to do anything else, we will be talking about it and keeping you more accountable along the way. Let's go ahead and go into your other one, which you were actually in the news for.
Yes, I was. I used to get Google alerts quite often, and I don't get them quite as frequent as I used to, but I'm really excited about this one because I guess not too long ago, a investigative reporter for Channel 5 NBC did an 8-part series on Vision Zero and safe streets in Dallas. And I've been doing this work at a statewide level for quite some time, but was also involved at the local level with the adoption of Vision Zero in Fort Worth and, speed limits at the state level, looking at that, road design, all of the things. So Safe Streets initiatives has been something that I've been passionate about for a long time. And so when that investigative reporter was interested in turning his vision over to the Fort Worth side of things, it was suggested to him that I was a person that he should talk to. And so the first story that he did focusing on what is happening in Fort Worth showed up this week. I've been talking to him, I think, since the end of the year last year. And he came over and we walked some of the streets and pointed out some of the things. And he clearly is showing that, I was pleased to see that they are basically saying that Fort Worth is doing a better job than Dallas when it comes to our Vision Zero. There's been some hiccups along the way in that some of the work that we started before the pandemic, has been impacted by driver behavior during the pandemic. I mean, you and I were discussing this before we started recording about, if there's less people on the road, then why would there be more deaths on the road? And the problem is less people, more speed, and speed tends to lead to more fatalities.
And most of
So-
this happens at nighttime anyways, right? These fatalities.
I don't know if
saw,
that's the case. I would have to look at, I don't know for sure. If
I saw,
sometimes visual stuff, so adding lighting and all that kind of stuff is important. So I think that those are all safety concerns. But a lot of it is road design. And, you know, I've driven on so many roads that have a speed limit sign that says 30 or 35, but it's 3 lanes in each direction, wide open, straightaways with wide lanes and just plenty of room that makes a person feel like going faster than that is the norm. That if you were to try to limit yourself to 30, you would feel very much like you were not driving the way you naturally should drive. And we've designed a lot of our roads that way in areas to get people from point A to point B as quickly as possible. And the focus has been very much on alleviating congestion and flow of traffic, free flow of traffic. And in some areas of our city, that is absolutely not appropriate, where you have children going to and from school and parks and in neighborhoods where people are trying to walk around and not be in their car for every trip. And so basing this information on data many years ago, back in 2017, 2018, the city started measuring the high crash impact areas and had a consultant identify places where infrastructure should be improved to address that. And it often is in Black and brown neighborhoods that have been ignored in the past and have not gotten the infrastructure attention that they should. And now we have the far north competing for these dollars as well because of the patterns of development that we've allowed to occur in those areas. So this article...
So you're saying we could use ARPA funds to maybe solve these?
Well, they are, because
cool.
I mean, there's some of that money is going to far north, and some of it is to address some of the street stuff. So I don't think it's all building new roads in far north that they were looking at those ARPA dollars. I think some of it is redesign of those roadways to address this.
Keeping everyone on track here, we're now in ramification number 2. Ramification number 1 was now you have to have fees added to basically grow infrastructure because all of our budget is tied up. And so that was an example with the maintenance fee for trash. Now we just did ramification number 2, which is more deadly roads if we don't fix them. And restoring the infrastructure and making them more safe roads. We also now are into ramification number 3. Texas surpasses California for food insecurity, study shows. New data shows that food insecurity has significantly increased since 2021. Nearly 5 million North Texans face hunger, up from 2021, according to Feeding America's Map the Meal Gap study. Over 1/3 of those facing hunger are children, according to the press release from North Texas Food Bank. Food insecurity is defined by the U.S. Department of Agriculture as the lack of access at times to enough food for an active, healthy life. Hunger among Texas children in particular has increased by 5%. The new numbers were released as local food banks brace for peak summer demand when children lack access to school nutrition programs. The study highlights North Texas Food Bank service areas in the nation's 4th largest for food insecurity. Over 700,000 people, or 1 in 8, deal with food insecurity within the North Texas Food Bank's 13 county services area. The rate of children food insecurity increased 20.8%, up from 15.8% in 2021. The CEO of the North Texas Food Bank says, in the heart of North Texas, where the number of people facing hunger is greater than the populations of cities like Seattle or San Francisco, the statistics that strike hardest is nearly 40% of those in need are children. And this is just unacceptable. Tricia Cunningham, CEO of the North Texas Food Bank.
I mean, I think we've been talking a lot about food deserts in Fort Worth, and there are individuals and nonprofits that are trying to tackle this. And I think that clearly the burden of all of this cannot fall to just individual nonprofits. Just on Saturday, I was at Connex with the Southside Community Garden folks who are helping people have raised planter beds in their homes so that they can grow and cook their own food. And that's kind of one of the ideas of trying to tackle that food desert and provide food. And I know there's multiple organizations doing that. But again, this is clearly showing that number and that need is growing beyond what can be tackled by individual nonprofits.
Yeah. And I think for me, just like the whole wrap around here is like, this is also why it's like, man, we're having food insecurity. So we were just talking about an additional fee to pick up trash. And so like the answer here is like, you're right. Economic burden is there. Inflation is impacting the average Fort Worthian or North Texan. But the answer to be, and if your politician is not saying this, then they're probably not serving us correctly. Well, how can we get money back from police? Because when all of our money is tied up to one thing, if all the politicians aren't saying, okay, we can't do a fee or we can't support food insecurity issues.
And we're going to keep lowering your taxes.
And we're going to keep lowering your taxes and we're going to keep closing schools. Their second answer, the solution to this is, well, let's look at our CCPD budget. Let's look at
money we're already collecting and reallocating it to the things that are needed.
Exactly. All right. Sell the tank. Right. Let's get going. All right. So we're going to keep moving and let's go ahead finally into wins and losses. Now, here's the kicker, beautiful people. I just want to also acknowledge you if you're still here. You're an amazing soul. I'm so glad you live in Fort Worth. I'm so glad you care about this place. I'm so glad you're fighting for this place and making it a better place. You give us life if you're listening to this still and making things happen. We're going to go into wins and losses, but I didn't have a win today, but I'm just going to go ahead and say mine, and my win is you. All right. You who are listening to this podcast, it means a lot to us. Again, this podcast is very indie, independent. We're not trying to make it the biggest thing. We're trying to grow quietly, but then also getting the right people to listen, the people who care, the people who move things in Fort Worth, and that is you. So wins and losses. We have one win down. I can go ahead and jump in my losses because I told you I had 3 today. And which is an inappropriate time to have 3 because we're already an hour and 30 minutes in. But I think you also have like lost wins, but it's more based on.
I mean, my loss is there were several fantastic events that happened on Saturday that I missed because of a previous engagement, a birthday party that we attended made me not be in Fort Worth on Saturday night. Or actually Saturday all day and into the evening. But there was an opportunity on Saturday to attend several events that are going to be repeating. So we all can participate in them in the future. So the first one was the organization called Historic Northside, which is the Main Street collaboration with the Hispanic Chamber, had their second or third music event in Marine Park. It was basically an event called Sounds of Summer, and it's in Spanish, and I don't want to butcher it, but it's how do you say
Sonidos?
It? Sonidos del Summer, which is Sounds of Summer. And they had I was having FOMO like crazy because everybody I know was there. They were all sharing, and it looked like a great event. Just having a lot of great music in Marine Park, hearkening back to past musical events that they've had there. And this is going to be an ongoing thing. I could not find the dates of upcoming future events, but keep an eye on what Historic Northside District has planned because there will be future opportunities to do that. In addition, the Near South Side had Lost in Sound, which was a musical event as well. And that started at noon and was musical events in local bars, restaurants, outside, non-traditional music places. An architecture firm had a music event going on in their place. And that started at noon and went through 1:00 in the morning. And it's called the Lost in Sound. And those dates are already available. If some of you, many of you are familiar with Magnolia on the Green. There's some construction going on in that area that's impacting the ability for that event to continue. And so this is a focus on South Main Village, which is right there kind of at Vickery and South Main. And on June 15 will be the next one. September 21st will be the one after that. And then October 19th will be the one after that. And there was a huge emphasis on getting there by public transportation. There was an ability to take Zip Zone around to the various venues within the district. And so while it is my great loss that I did not get to attend either of those events yesterday, it will be my great win to help support those events going forward. There's been a lot of talking about music venues closing, and I think this is a major response to that to give our musician community the support that they need. And I think there was actually an article about healthcare for musicians as well. So I think there's a lot of people trying to
I did see that
to
one.
make
That was
that
a good
better.
one as well. Awesome. Well, I'm going to kind of end with, like I said, 3 losses, but really the loss at the end of the day, it's just 3 examples of how bad our state leadership is with Governor Abbott at the lead. Seriously, guys, I mean, let's just get started. Governor Abbott departed Daniel Perry, veteran who killed police brutality protester in 2020. Right, this was Daniel Perry murdered somebody who was advocating for Black Lives Matter. Let's note this was a white male who he murdered, who was advocating and activating as a person who was advocating for Black Lives Matter. Daniel Perry texts his friends about plans to murder a protester he disagreed with. And this person is pardoned by our governor. Massive, just insanity and loss for Texas that this is allowed. I'm not saying that there should be any other case that should get pardoned, or we should be looking at other things. But the fact that this kind of power happens is awful. Travis County sentenced Perry to 25 years in prison. So kind of give you the size of that. Number 2 is Gillespie County election. We talked about them before. Gillespie County election costs balloon after they switched to hand ballots. So they counted hand ballots. So public records show that they had to employ 350 people to hand count, that they were paying $12 an hour. The work came up to 2,300 hours, which means they had to spend $27,000 in wages. Now, here's the kicker. The Texas Secretary of State's office will reimburse Gillespie Republicans and other local parties across the state for primary runoff election expenses. Last year at an election law seminar hosted by the office election division, officials told political party chairs that the state has a fixed amount allocated to pay for primary election fees. And Texas is now using our surplus we talked about that they won't use in schools to fund Gillespie County's hand counting initiative that was stupid, inappropriate, because they were running they thought election fraud and integrity was a really thing. And now because the GOP has so hold of that county, they wasted their local tax dollars, and now our state dollars, our surplus is going to them. Another crazy Governor Abbott story. And the final one is not necessarily directly to Governor Abbott, but we know Governor Abbott's tied to this organization. The National Rifle Association could receive up to $1 million in state and local monies as an incentive for holding its annual meeting in Dallas this week. This weekend, Trump, NRA, was in town fighting, saying, just watch what they said. Here's the kicker. If you're if you're freedom of guns and all that, to me, it's how you talk about things. It's the things of how you bring up items and talk about them. It's just foolery. It's bullying. It's evil. I don't know why anyone change the things they're talking about, and you would not allow that behavior to happen in any other topic. And what they tout about, let guns ride, drill, baby, drill, all these words, like you don't, that's not someone you want to lead. All right. And that is just like, anyways, happened this weekend in the NRA. And we are potentially having an incentives for $1 million in state and local money. But here's the part where I want to bring it up, just to make sure I'm keeping every single person accountable that I can. According to the Texas Economic Development and Tourism Department, Visit Dallas applied in January for a state aid to help bring the NRA meeting to the city's Kay Bailey Hutchinson Convention Center. The city contracts with Visit Dallas to serve as its tourism and visitor bureau. The state initially estimates it will pay the NRA $862,000. Visit Dallas estimates will pay almost $138,000. Now, it's probably going to be less than that because these are projections, and history shows that it's often less the money the NRA brings. But I just want to be clear here. Any journalist or reporter listening to this, any record that Visit Fort Worth gives money for incompetent and bad associations like this to bring their conventions here, I'm not saying that they shouldn't, because economic viability is the thing that they're supposed to be caring about and getting people in hotel rooms. But it just should be clear on the record when Visit Fort Worth, if they ever did or have done, do the same things for associations like the NRA. So the reason why we should keep that accountable, because they just rammed us with direct mails and talked about how the hot tax was going to be good for Fort Worthians. But I don't know why it's good for Fort Worthians to ever hold the NRA convention and then fund it with the same tax dollars you asked me to vote for. So that is just what needs to be aware and be out there as well. Those are my 3 losses, Ann.
So we normally try to end on a win, and I know you said your win before we launched into all of that.
Is the people listening?
Yes, the people listening. We absolutely continue to say that. I think last week your win might have been you and I.
Yeah.
More recently, and so I think that I look at all of our listeners as, here in the trenches with you and I.
Yep.
Continuing to try to make Fort Worth the best place that it can possibly be.
Yeah, and you know who I could give a win to? Sandra Sadek, Harrison Mantis, every journalist that we have used to do this episode. You guys are Silas Allen. I'm just going through all of them. You guys have been really amazing. Like the work you guys do. James Hartley, all of you. Thank you. Thank you for being the journalist that you are to keep us all informed.
And I attended the Fort Worth Report community conversation recently, and they're going to have another one coming up in June about transportation. So I think that we do owe a shout out to all of the reporters that continue to do the reporting here in this community that we rely on greatly for the content of this here pod.
Well, guys, we gave you a full episode. We have a exciting episode next week as well. Hopefully you were able to get through this episode before that episode. But we're going to be talking to someone that I think, potentially talking to someone that people will be excited to hear from. And you guys been great. And any last closing responses?
I think we've gone way over time, and hopefully people stuck
One
with
last
us.
hurrah to vote,
Hey, yeah, absolutely. Early voting starts the day that you're listening to this, if you're caught up. So hopefully you get caught up before early voting ends. Go to the website, find out where those locations are at, do your homework, ask people you trust, get input, and be sure to vote.
Wait in. Take care, everyone.
Swipe, dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your life. Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow